You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Li. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm here with Winston Li, who founded Arima, which is a sort of analytics and media mix modeling platform, at least the way I perceive it, but there may be some additional layers beyond that. So Winston, I'd love you to tell us what the origin story is for Arima and sort of how you came to decide that it was time to build something new.
Sure. First of all, thanks, Kevin, for having me. Really glad to meet and to be able to chat here. A little bit about Arima and certainly my background as well and how I got to where I'm today. I'm a data scientist by training. I studied statistics when I was in school, and I did grad school, all that sort of thing. But after that, my first job was at Omnicom, was at a media agency, which back at the time was somewhat of a weird choice because all of the master's level or PhD level statisticians, these people think about, and this is 10 years ago, these people think about going to investment banks, hedge funds, those were sort of the popular places. And everybody sort of looks at me and go like, media agency, what the heck is that? Like, why do you join? Why do you go there? I went there and I really had a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing the stuff that I do. I was a director of data science at Omnicom Canada. So I sat at the holding company level and I serviced, a number of agencies under the holding company. Like I worked with PhD, I worked with Analect, I worked with all of these other Acuin, the programmatic arm. I worked with a bunch of these companies. And one of the primary things that I built was marketing mix models. I built marketing mix models for clients and other types of analysis too. I was at Omnicom for 5.5 years, and then I went off and had a brief shot at PwC. Where I led a consumer analytics team under the consulting practice. So how did Arima came about? Well, I spent a lot of time building sort of customized solutions for various clients. And one of the things I realized is, one, the work that you're doing is not all that different. Like take marketing mix model as an example. Building a marketing mix model for automotive company, for example, isn't all that different from building for a bank or for a consumer goods company. There's lots of similarities between them. And yet, as consulting companies, we sort of sell them as services. Like, this is an independent project. This is another independent project. This is another independent project, each of which obviously requires lots of time for the clients to onboard, to get their stuff done, to get their data ready and so on. Lots of inefficiency, very high cost. And of course, the implication of that is I was only working with the largest brands out there. We're working with, for example, Honda was one of the clients that I worked for, and Scotiabank was another client. It's one of the five large banks here in Canada. If you're a large client with this type of budget, obviously you can afford to consume marketing science and do better. But marketing science shouldn't be just something that only big companies leverage. It should be things that small players should be able to benefit from as well. And with this consulting model, that's obviously not going to happen. So I thought, well, why don't I start to build a marketing science or media science software? Why don't we build a software that would replace somebody like a Winston so that an organization can license the software and they can just go in, open up their browser, go into the tool, start running the analysis. It's simple, it's easy to use, and it's a nice interface. So that was really the whole point of building Arima, simply to democratize marketing science so that organizations of all sizes can benefit.
Cool. Well, I before I get into asking you about the synthetic society portion of your platform, I will ask a question which is a sort of outgrowth of your democratization of media mix modeling and testing, in that, I've found whenever I've done media mix modeling or any kind of statistical testing that obviously the the larger the player and the bigger the spend, the more statistically significant the results are.
Yeah.
And the easier it is to, for example, build experiments that use either fractional factorial design, or if it's a smaller spender, perhaps A/B type testing. And so where's that sweet spot? Like for a marketer, in order for them to get a statistically valid sample or a statistically valid result within the media mix modeling ecosystem, sort of where does it start to become practical?
Right. And I think there's a few layers to what practical mean. Looking at it in one way is obviously the cost. If building a model takes you $50,000 and your budget is only $70,000, well, no matter how accurate the model is, it's not going to be effective, right? You don't burn your 60% of your budget on a model. That the incremental lift you gain is not going to get the return. I have this sort of rule of thumb where for an organization, 3 to 5% of their budget could go to marketing science. That's sort of where the sweet spot is. So if you're spending too much money on it, then obviously the incremental gain you're going to get from this extra knowledge will not pay back, just because you lost so much budget on the model building phase. And on the other hand, yes, you're right. When organizations are really, really large, they can actually go deeper into the modeling, exactly like what you said. You can do different tests. You can do A/B tests, for example. We also have many clients when they're a little larger that they don't just build models. They don't just build one model. They build multiple different models. They have regional models where, in the case of Canada, we often have a national model. We have, models by different provinces. In the United States, they also have models by states, even models by DMA, and they go even more granular. So there's obviously these extra steps that you can take to make your models more relevant and more efficient. The other way that we sort of aim for in the Arima framework is that models should be well maintained. In my days in the consulting world, because everything was so manual, when you build a model, it's like a once a year type of thing. Once a year you build the model, the vendor comes back with some presentation decks. I used to be the one bringing presentation decks to my clients. You give a very nice talk, so there's some very nice charts and visuals, and that's it. People put that aside. People have some learning. I don't know what they do, but they plan use that model, and then they put it aside, and it sits in the cabinet and starts to collect dust. But now we're doing something very, very different. And to be completely honest, when I was speaking with my PhD friends, and when we were talking about what kind of a job did you find, and what sorts of things, we have a lot of them, and they end up in banks and wealth management, and these people also build models to allocate their portfolios, and they hear like you update your model once a year. They're like, oh my God, that's unbelievable. We update our models like every day or every whatever. We do it so often. So, with this sort of motivation in mind, here at Arima, we're really looking for dynamic models. We're trying to get to real-time models, but it's, to be honest, it's probably very far from that, just because a lot of organizations don't have real-time sales data. A lot of offline media data. It's very difficult to collect in a real-time basis. We're building lots of automations. We're getting a lot of our customers to connect their Facebook Ads Manager or their Google, DCM platforms or whatnot, integrating it directly into our tools, so you don't have to manually pull data every time. It's just an API connection that you can get live data. But still, with the manual, there isn't a component of manual data in there, and not something that you can automate very, very easily. So we're trying to aim for monthly updates. Most of our clients on our platform update their models on a monthly basis, and they use it for both reporting as well as planning.
Great. So yeah, I did mention ahead, that I had read about the Arima Synthetic Society system, and it made it clear that it was live in Canada. I wasn't 100% clear if it was live in the United States and other countries as well, or if that was still something that was in process. And if you can explain what that is for folks who go to the website yet.
Sure. The synthetic society is our sort of core, the foundation of our models and media planning tools. And in a nutshell, the synthetic society is basically a modeled version of the real society. Taking Canada as an example, we use about 23 different data sources, and they are a good mix of public data like the census, to market research data like panels and studies, to credit card transactions, to mobility data. These are sort of the big four buckets of data that we acquire. We acquire data from our vendors. They're all fully anonymized, very often aggregated to a zip level or to a postal code level, depending on again which country you are. We bring them all together and we use that to model out the society. So in Canada, our synthetic society has 38 million records. Think of it as 38 million unique personas. They don't necessarily match one-to-one with actual Canadians, but every one of these personas are tied to a particular geography, and they are statistically similar to the actual residents of Canada. And it's on top of this model that we develop our MMMs, our MMM forecasts. As well, we have a set of media planning tool where people can do audience research and cross media planning and understanding where these people are located and so on. The company has started in 2020, and since then we've been building out our Canadian Synthetic Society. Just this year, we've completed the U.S. Synthetic Society. The U.S. Synthetic Society isn't as robust as the Canadian one just yet. In Canada, we have 23 sources. In the U.S., we have about 6 or 7. But over the next couple of months, we will certainly be focusing on the U.S. Synthetic Society and trying to make that better and better.
You mentioned that a lot of the data sources that you use to create the Synthetic Society are either already anonymized or you're further anonymizing them. So why is it important to measure media effectiveness while protecting the consumer's privacy?
Yeah, because marketers have access to so much data these days, and if you start to layer in data, even if they're anonymized, even if PII is removed, you can still get into big trouble really, really quickly. And one of the things that we've been looking at lately is mobility data. And with mobility data, you're basically tracking people's movement based on their cell phones. It's perfectly legitimate at least in present day, at least in our current, sort of privacy law, it's perfectly legitimate. You get, people's phones get pinged, you get a lat long, and you get that over a period of time, and then you can see how people travel throughout the city or throughout the country during a day, the week, the month, and so on. And you can imagine this type of data. If you use it in a sort of in an aggregated way, like I want to count how many people visit my store or how many people pass by this out of home board, that's good. But if you use it sort of at an individual level, if you start to actually pick out someone's path, you can see where this person is going. You can see where they are during the day. And yes, it's not real-time data. Data is usually delayed by a couple of days, but people's movement also don't change. So technically, you can just stand in front of them, the next day and go like, "Hey, I know everything about you," and that is a problem. Having these kinds of data, and then again, if you blend it in with their survey data, if you know their home address, you can we'll go into the census and find a whole bunch of things about them. If you start to piece these things together, it gets really tricky. So having access to granular data, especially mobility data, is really nice. You can use it to measure conversion. You can see what stores or people are visiting. You can do geofencing. You can do all that sort of thing. But privacy is also something that we have to really, really be careful of. And this is where sort of the value prop of the synthetic society comes in, is that it's not actually real data, it's synthetic data. So we're basically taking a cup like this, and we're making another cup that's similar, so that it's a cup, what it does, but it's not the original cup that you started with.
Great. So one of the questions that came up as I was thinking through the conversation we were going to have was how media mix modeling might change for a very direct response focused advertiser versus sort of a branding awareness upper funnel advertiser, and the where they're placing most of their media bets. So Any thoughts there as to how you would treat those types of advertisers differently?
Yeah, there's different approaches to this problem. There are two good ones that we typically use when our clients ask for this sort of question. The first is the use of ad stock. In media mix modeling, a particular sort of technique that's introduced is called ad stock. In other words, when I spend something, when I spend $100 in TV, I don't immediately get the effect. The effect sort of trickles in after week 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's kind of a long tail effect where the immediate week following my investment, there's more firepower, and then as you delay, as you go further into the future, there's less and less of sort of remaining ammunition, so to say. So ad stock is something that's very common. Almost everyone's MMMs include ad stocks these days, and the model, as it tries to predict tries to learn best fit, also starts to look at optimal ad stock. So for channels that have longer impacting results, like TV, for example, ad stocks are typically longer. Typically we're looking at 8 to 10, 12 weeks ad stock. So that, in other words, if you make an investment now, I know that sales may not come in until 2 to 3 months later, and that's sort of where the branding component comes in. Versus a channel more like let's say search, there's virtually no ad stock. People search, they either buy or that's it. You don't get them again. So that's one way of looking at things. The other thing is also, we always advise our client like what it is that you're modeling against. Why do you really build that model? What do you why do you build it? Why do you build it? We have clients that model lower funnel metrics like sales or the number of leads or number of calls, in which case, we say, sure, give us your media data, give us your sales data. We build a model, and that model is used to figure out which channels, what combinations are best at driving sales. And we also have clients that build models to model more long-term things like brand awareness, where they're not necessarily modeling against any particular KPI. They might be modeling against an index, like they have brand tracking or brand awareness or that sort of study, and they build a model against that. In which case, what they're getting for the model is these channels help increase my awareness. It helps drive, my share of voice, my share of market, or my brand equity or whatnot. It's not necessarily driving sales. So the client, depending on the goal of building a model, we can tailor the model towards what it is that they're looking for.
Oh, that's great to know. And I'm sure there's hybrids that are sort of halfway between or potentially looking at both lower funnel KPIs and upper funnel awareness and branding. Does, obviously for different types of products, different types of industries, they have very different sales cycles, very different consumer journeys. So does purchase size or purchase consideration change the way the data manifests itself when you're running a media mix model?
It does. It does, and it could come in a variety of ways. And again, I think this is the fun part of MMMs is that there's nothing carved in stone. You can be as creative as you want when it comes to what factors do I use? How do I represent that in the model? Certainly, you've got factors like considerations and longer purchase cycles. Like people buying a car. Well, people don't just look at it. People don't just look at your ad and they wake up and they go buy a new car next day, right? That's a long sales cycle. So you need to factor that into the model. On the other hand, you might also have effects like coupons, where you drop the model, you drop the coupons in people's doorsteps, and it's got an expiration date on it. And after that, that's it. Your media investment is useless. So absolutely, all of these things are important. And this is why when we built these MMMs, it's not just about us telling the client, hey, this is how it should be done. This is how it has always been done. No, it's not like that. It's always about understanding their business and tweaking the models to to fit the needs. So you're right. If it's selling a can of soda versus a cell phone versus a vacation, very, very different things that needs to be factored in.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously for consumer product goods like cans of soda or laundry detergent, right? It's a bit more of a obvious share of wallet fight versus a car. It's technically still a share of wallet fight because it's either going to be a Toyota or a Honda, or maybe it's going to be a Tesla, right? But the wallet, is sort of concentrated, like once every 5 years it gets spent, versus for soda, right? Incremental changes for those people are perhaps indifferent between Coke and Pepsi. If you can move the percentage points a few directions one way or the other, that potentially is tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in that kind of a share of wallet fight. So very different marketing, but in the end, I guess any leading indicators you guys can pull together to understand that this is actually moving the needle, that's valuable to a media buyer.
Yeah, exactly.
So, one of the other challenges I found in when I've done sort of more simplistic media mix models, which are typically the longitudinal tests or geographic based tests, where I try to see lift over baseline, is that, it's not even just the media plan, right? It's whether or not the creative is good, because you're trying to get the right message to the right person at the right time to break through the clutter. Because other than search, which is more of the person raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm interested in this right now, nearly all the other media are interruptive, right? They're interrupting what the person's actually doing and trying to get them to do something different, pay attention to an ad message. So, you may not even know whether the creative was heard or seen, whether it's a Spotify audio ad or whether it's a video ad. They might have, too many people might be either leaving to go to the restroom during that sports game or whatever, right? So you don't even know for sure that the creative is seen. And then if it was seen or heard, does it break through? Was it really engaged with? And so, is there room for sort of improving not just targeting of a media plan, but also creative execution when you're doing MMA?
Absolutely. I'll speak to the testing part first. There's definitely many different ways where we can structure a model to test differences between creatives. To give you an obvious example, sometimes we have clients running TV campaigns, and they've got 3 or 4 different creatives. They might have a national campaign, they might have a regional campaign. In Canada, you also have to deal with English and French. You might have a campaign with a portfolio of cars. Imagine if you're Honda, you've got lots of cars on TV versus just featuring one car. All these are very different situations, and certainly when you build models, you can test those. So you can run statistical tests to say, are their effects the same? Are their effects different? Do we see, you can run a t-test essentially to see if they're the same or different. So these are some things that you can certainly do when it comes to creative. On the other hand, this is where I want to sort of bring back the synthetic society. This is where the synthetic society comes in. Is that there's sort of an extra 20 something, like 23 data sources that can get overlaid on top of the MMM to make it more richer. Most of our clients are media agencies, but we do have a few creative agencies as well. If you're looking for car buyers, what do these people like? What are the sort of the pressing issues they think about? What media channels do they consume, and what's their family or income like? There are a lot of these how do I create better creative questions, which is not something an MMM alone can answer. But because we're also building this synthetic society, people could go into the synthetic society and filter out these people who are looking to buy a car and try to discover some things about them that they don't know before. So that also helps with the creative process.
Great. Are there any examples of where you've done studies? This could be either post founding of Arima or even before then, where you did your analysis and the highly performing channel surprised you, like you had an existing hypothesis and then you went ahead and did the study and you actually either shocked or at least surprised which the winning channel or media type was.
surprises come in all the time. And this is where you as the statistician need to make the decision of, is that a model problem, or is that that's just what it is. and to be honest, like, there are lots of cases where it's a model problem too. Like, something doesn't look right, and then we go back and we look at the data, and we ask the client to check their data again or to whatnot, and you might find, a client might say, I forgot a zero here, or I added an extra zero. So it actually isn't because of the surprise was, there's a reason why there was a surprise. Things like this happen all the time. So we try to, on the one end, we try to be result agnostic in the sense that whatever results come out of the model, we don't overlay our assumptions. We don't just think the model is wrong. But on the other hand, we need to put some guardrails, around the models, in the sense that if something is completely out of expectation, then we need to go back and double check our work. Are there results that are surprising? Assuming data is correct? Yeah, I think it happens. Especially if clients are trying new channels. Like, we have a couple of clients who recently started to invest a lot of money in TikTok, and then they may not have done it for ever before, and they all of a sudden just started doing that, and you could get really wonky results because they've only had 5 weeks of TikTok data, and the model doesn't really know how to handle that. So okay, it's an iterative process. If you see something that's different, communicate with the client, let them know that often this is because they've only used that media for just a few weeks out of their entire modeling period, and so that's when the ability to be able to update their models on a monthly basis or even on a weekly basis becomes really helpful, because they can see a change very quickly versus come and do it again next year, sort of thing.
If you see data which seems to indicate that there might be an opportunity, do you sometimes recommend that they either do a longitudinal or geo-based, essentially experimental design in their next go round? Not with a big enough media budget that you'd be pulling media away from something that might be working, but just sufficiently to be able to validate the hypothesis.
Yeah, and it's an MMM is all about an iterative process. It's all about trying and testing and validating different hypotheses. So you're right. Those are what we do as marketing scientists.
Great. And one other form of paid media that people don't necessarily always put in a paid media bucket, and may be particularly challenging to measure the impact from, would be influencer marketing, right? Because it sort of sits mostly in paid media, but it looks a lot like earned media in the way it behaves. Because certainly not everybody with 1 million Instagram followers is the same, and 1 million Instagram followers is quite different than 1 million Facebook followers and 1 million TikTok followers, right? So your sort of baseline metrics that you would initially potentially judge the differences between influencers A, B, and C would be quite different, and then obviously the creative is very different. So have you had to sort of adapt your models to reflect influencer marketing more heavily over the last couple of years?
We haven't had a whole lot of clients doing influencer marketing, to be honest. It is a trend that we start to see in the last little while, but it hasn't been super common. Do we adapt models? Obviously, we do. New things come out all the time, right? So if you don't change your models, then that becomes a problem. So we certainly do adapt our models. On the other hand, you're right. There's all sorts of different media, and you've got influencer marketing, you've got more traditional channels, you've got even things like SEO. I've invested in SEO. How does that come into play? Right? I've invested money in my CRM. How does that come into the mix and so on? Right? So, fortunately, we have something called money. All of these investments ultimately result down to a comes down to a dollar investment. So, a lot of times, if we're confused, like if we don't know what to do, if it's a new channel, sometimes resolving it down to a dollar amount and putting that into the model is surprisingly efficient. Sometimes people talk about, what's the recall of this channel? What's the how many impressions did we generate? What's the click-through rate of all these models, of all these channels and whatnot? And people have all of these factors that they want to put in the model, but not every channel has that. Like for things like out of home, you still basically only have like dollar spend. You don't have any other factors. So being able to use kind of the lowest common denominator, factors that are consistent across all channels is a very efficient way in making MMMs, sort of standardizing MMMs. And very often, dollar spend is just that lowest common denominator. You have that channel, you have that number for every channel. So just use that in your models.
Right. And that, I guess that is often very geo focused, right? In the case of out of home, in the case of, broadcast radio, or even potentially digital radio or digital over the top TV, often it's not evenly spread across all geographies. And so that might give your model a little bit more data to work with regards to understanding if something's working or not.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So what has you excited over the next year, either because of your business or just overall with regards to the marketing ecosystem?
Well, I'll talk about the ecosystem first, and then our business. The deprecation of cookies is a really big thing, and from the MMM standpoint, that's a good thing. Traditionally, there always has been this sort of battle between MMM versus MTA, multi-touch attribution. If you do an MTA, you have log data, or you have cookie-based data where you can figure out the person's path, but it only works with digital channels. And then you have MMM, which sort of is more holistic, but it doesn't have the sort of the granularity that an MTA has. So as a fan of an MMM, obviously, now that MTAs are more difficult, it should be a good thing for MMMs. And certainly, I hope that a lot of organizations now consider MMM as a very serious modeling and reporting mechanism that they could use to optimize budget and to keep track of how well they're doing with certain things. From a company standpoint, expanding to the US is what we're focusing on in the next couple of months. We've built a little bit of a reputation in Canada. We've got some very decent clients in Canada, but now Canada is a small market, and we want to join the big fish, so to say. So being able to explore a new territory is definitely something that we're interested in, and it makes us very excited.
Great. Well, I'll be excited to continue to watch your evolution of the platform and as a company. And certainly, I think your point is well taken that as MTA becomes more and more difficult, MMM will need to step in and fill that gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Kevin Li's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.